On the God Rock Show, we're catching up with Matthew West. Is it true you discovered Jesus at a Stephen Curtis Chapman concert?
It's true that I discovered my calling in music at a Stephen Curtis Chapman concert.
Right.
I actually discovered Jesus at watching TV, listening to Billy Graham, the Reverend Billy Graham. And then years later, I was a college student trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I was sitting at a Stephen Curtis Chapman concert in an arena not far from where I went to university. And man, I just sat there crying. Like, I just felt like God was telling me that someday I'd be up there, singing songs of hope, just like Stephen did.
Yeah. Have you told him that?
Yeah, I've probably told him that an awkward amount of time.
Yeah.
I've told him that like 15 times, and then he's like, yeah, you can stop telling me that story. But not only did I tell him that, but I called him one day and I said, I'm writing a song about that moment. It's called The Sound of a Life Changing. And I said, why don't you come write it with me? So the verse says, well, now I'm trying to remember it. I heard it all from the cheap seats, Assembly Hall Arena, Champaign, Illinois, Stephen Curtis up on stage and talking about the whole thing. And it was like, that was the moment when I realized that God was, and that was the sound of my life changing.
We're going to have to come back to that because there's him making an impact on you. Mm-hmm. Full circle, you're now making an impact on him? Musos.
Oh, on everybody.
Yes. I've heard.
Okay. I was wondering if I was making an impact on Stephen. No, it's full circle moments. Every night I get on stage and every time I do an interview like this, it's a full circle moment. Yeah. There I was in that arena. And now I look out at my audiences and I think, who's out there? What's God calling them to do?
Yeah. He impacted me too. Random story. I used to want to be his backup singer for years.
Yeah.
And I had this recurring dream that I'd be singing Dance the Dinosaur with Stephen Curtis Chapman on stage.
That's
one
awesome.
of his lesser known hits, but I loved it. It was good times. What was life like before you found God? Can you remember back then?
Yeah, I think to sum it up, I was my father was a minister, and so I grew up in church. And I would say before I personally found God, I figured like it never connected. I never connected on a personal level this relationship with God, this idea that He wanted to have a friendship with me. So I used to always kind of live like, well, I think I'm going to get to heaven because I'm in the family business. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Church was what we did. Christianity wasn't who I was. Yeah. And that was the real shift, that when it became personal to me, it became real to me. Before that, it was just a family association.
What was it like when you started discovering that you had these God-given talents? All of a sudden, you're writing songs for Natalie Grant, Point of Grace. How did you get into that position?
Well, I started my career in Nashville behind the scenes as a songwriter. I tried to get a record deal, and I auditioned for several record labels, and they all turned me down. I wasn't ready, and they didn't think I was good enough.
Too good looking.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's what they said. They said he's not handsome enough. I was like, Lord, you and I both know that ain't true, right? But I started writing. I just kept working on my songwriting, and they started taking my songs and giving them to other artists. And at the time, I thought that was rejection.
Really?
But then I started to realize, well, wait, maybe God has a bigger plan. Imagine that, right? And so years later, I signed my own record deal, but I had already built this career. And now I sort of have two careers, and I never stopped writing for other artists. And so it's so much fun because, I might be at an event like a radio event like this, and I get to go in different rooms and I hear an artist sing a song that I got to write with them. And I get just as much joy when one of those songs goes to the top of the charts as I do when one of my own, because I feel proud to be part of contemporary Christian music. Yeah. And I feel so honored to be able to be part of the creative processes of some of these amazing artists who are coming up, just like I was coming up under Stephen Curtis.
Ever thought about releasing an album now of all the songs you wrote for other artists?
I thought about that, but there's a part of me that thinks like those songs were meant for them. Okay. And so maybe someday I'll do like my version of them.
Or covers.
But I'll be honest,
duets.
the way those artists do those songs, it's like, I love the way they do them. You know what I mean? So it's like I wrote a song for Danny Goki, and it's like, his voice on that song is like, I ain't gonna do it better than that.
Yeah. So when did it click? When was the moment when all of a sudden Matthew West found his own voice?
Well, when a record label finally gave me an opportunity, and that was about 4 years of trying. But the real moment where I feel like I found my own voice was when I started to collect people's stories and invite people the opportunity to share their story with me. And then I took their stories, I read their stories, and I wrote songs inspired by their stories. And that became a real turning point where I started to realize, what if my records, what if my creative process is different in that I'm actually finding inspiration from the people at my concerts, you know, from the people who follow me on social media. And so a lot of like my biggest songs on the radio are actually songs that were inspired by one person who shared a part of their story with me of how God was at work. And it's been the great joy of my life, being a storyteller at heart, but getting the chance to carry the stories of other people's lives to the world.
It's interesting when you dig down on your career, you've got millions of YouTube hits and streaming numbers, and you know, on paper you'd say, wow, you're a success. But is that even the end game? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I used to think it was. You know,
right.
I think there's, you know, I think it's like any pursuits or ambitions we have in our lives. You know, we can get off track. And even if you're doing something good, like singing about Jesus, you could still start marching towards the wrong, you know, end goal, towards the wrong finish line. You know, nobody wants to run a race. And I'll tell you a funny story. I was going for a run one day before a concert. I was in Portland, Maine, and I was by myself, and it was on this street. It was empty. And so for some reason, I thought, I'm gonna run down the middle of the street. So I was just going for a nice jog. And this crazy old man was walking towards me, and he had like a ripped up t-shirt, and he was all scraggly. It looked like he'd been up all night. And he stops me. He's like, "Hey, Sonny." I'm like, "What?" He's like, "Would you be mad if I told you something?" And I said, "Well, what is it?" He said, "The finish line is that way." And he pointed from the direction that I was running away from. And then he just started laughing, like he was joking, like, "Hey, you've been running in the wrong direction."
Yeah, right.
But it was almost like, was that an angel? You know,
absolutely,
disguised as it, because it made me think. Like, I thought about that so many times. Like, how many times am I living my life where I'm running, and I think I'm running the race, and
you think of that old guy?
Yeah, and the Lord reminds me, "Hey, the finish line is the other way. You're pursuing the wrong thing," and that, you know, man. That speaks to me, you know.
The irony is there's some old guy at dinner parties saying, there was this young guy running down the middle of the street, and I thought, I'm going to mess with his head.
Yeah, he didn't look like the dinner party type, but yeah, I mean, I'll never forget.
He's opened a can.
He thought that was the funniest joke.
Yeah.
And he made himself laugh, and then I started laughing,
so
and I
good.
thought, that's pretty good.
What's it like when people start all of a sudden, you know, contacting you and reaching out and saying, you've touched my heart, like this song has changed me?
That's everything. I mean, the goal of my music is to connect, you know, my songs with people's hearts, and then most importantly, connect their lives to the giver of life, you know? And so that's my mission in life. And so when somebody shares how a certain song has been a lifeline for them, or a soundtrack, or marking, you know, someone tell me, "Oh, I used this song at my wedding." Oh, that's amazing. You know what I mean? Or, you know, this song reminds me of the birth of my daughter, or this song is what I listened to when I was going through drug recovery, whatever it might be. You know, to be a part of somebody's story in that way is a very special thing.
When you were starting out all those years ago, what was the hope? Did you think, I want to have an impact? Were you hoping for that?
Yeah, I really was, because that's what I was seeing at the Stephen Curtis Chapman concert. It wasn't just music, it wasn't just a good time, it wasn't just entertainment. It was something more than a concert. And that's what I set out to do. Something more than just music, something more than just a concert. A lot of times, my songs are just a segue. They're just a gateway towards a deeper thing, a deeper meaning. That's why I'm doing a podcast now. That's why I'm writing books, is because it's like, it's all part of telling the story, but it's all with the same goal, like everything running hopefully towards the right finish line, which is running my race with perseverance and spending my whole life telling people about Jesus.
I love the full circle blessing. So tell me about how you're being blessed by people reacting to the music you're putting out?
I mean, you know, it's, I think the blessing is that it reminds me that God is at work, that God is mindful of us. And that every time somebody tells me how a song has impacted their life, I feel like it's God tapping me on the shoulder saying, see what happens when you trust me? See what happens when you follow me? I'm going to use you in ways that you could never imagine, beyond what you could ask or even think to ask for, right? And so that when I hear those stories, it spurs me on to go sit down and write another song for another lifeline, for another person who needs it.
Let's take off the music hat for a second. Along comes two daughters. Two daughters? How does that change things?
Changes everything.
Everything.
It's the greatest blessing in my life. My wife and I, we've been married for 19 years, and which is crazy because I'm only 29, so it's crazy how that happens. But we have two beautiful and amazing daughters, intelligent, smart, funny, so sarcastic. They get that from me, so now it's coming back to haunt me. But it's been a great gift in my life, just being a dad, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. I always thought I was going to have sons because I grew up, with two brothers, and now I got two girls, and I'm like, okay, I got to learn how to do this.
And we are so outvoted. I'm the same. Two daughters and a wife. We don't get a say. We don't get a vote. Even the dog ranks higher than me.
Yeah. Well,
house.
we have two dogs, and each dog I get is a boy. I'm like, at least, and I give them real
manly names.
Yeah. So I've got Nick and Rocky.
Yeah. Unbelievable. Are you writing songs about your kids? Are they inspiring? Yeah.
I've got a song coming out. It'll be out. It's around Father's Day, called "Before You Ask Her," and it's a song to the boy that's going to ask my daughter on a date, and it's like kind of let's have a little talk first, So I always say that there's a piece of my girls in every song I write, because they're the reason I get to do what I do. Sometimes there's more direct hit songs about them,
I got visions of Bob Carlyle's Butterfly Kisses moments.
This is like a Butterfly Kisses, yeah. Hopefully it makes the same amount of money. No, I'm just kidding.
I'll turn it to a golden book. What's the hardest thing about raising teenage daughters? I mean, I'm in that zone at the moment. What do you think is the hardest thing?
Boy, it's been such a joy. I think some of the hardest thing is it's navigating their difficulties in friendships. Girls can be mean to each other, and sometimes as a parent you want to step in and fix what's wrong. And I had a counselor say to me once, your job is not to write your child's story or fix the chapter that they're in. Your job is to walk with them through their story. And that really was a monumental shift for me to think, I'm not the author of their story. I know who is. Yeah. And God's allowed me the opportunity to walk with them through their story. So Lord, help me do that well. And sometimes that means restraint. Sometimes that means not saying too much. Sometimes that means listening. And those things are all very difficult for me. Yeah,
especially with the clothing choices when they come out into the lounge room and they just want your approval.
That's where I speak the truth. That's sometimes I'll be like, no.
How do you present Jesus to people that don't know him?
Well, you do it without words. It's like there's a quote that I'm paraphrasing. It says something to the extent of, tell everyone about Jesus, use words if necessary. Yeah. Right. So I think now more than ever, the world needs to see our actions lining up with, the Jesus we say we follow. Again, are you running the right way or are you running the wrong way? If Jesus says this way and your life is not moving in that direction, then nothing you could tell the world about Jesus is going to matter.
We've got people that are tuning in for the first time, maybe even discovering you. Can you give them some encouragement if they're having a bad day, a rough week, a hard year?
You think? I think we could all be in that boat, right? Man, I would just say, don't give up. And I know that sounds cliche, but ultimately, I hope that you can find hope in this reminder that you have an author of your story, and you're not it. But when you know who's writing the story of your life, you can believe that he is in control. And even if you're in the middle of a chapter of your story that looks like chaos or completely out of control, he is the author. He is the finisher of your faith. And ultimately, the one who writes your story loves a good comeback story. And I know that he's at work in your life. And so if you trust in him, look to him, ask him to show you his plan for your life. Move in the direction that he's calling you to go. Your life won't always be easy, but it will be fulfilling. And the finish line will be a gift of eternity called heaven. And that's the perspective that gives us the hope we need to make it through these heavy days today.
So good. On the God Rock Show,